Hi everyone, I'm Naomi Wells from the Institute of Modern Languages Research. Together with Paul Spence, I co-convene the Digital Modern Languages Seminar Series, which is a series which aims to bring together research and teaching in modern languages that engages with digital culture, media and technologies at all levels of education. So I'm pleased to welcome you to what is our last event of this academic year, and which appropriately, given it's been quite a strange academic year, is focusing on post-pandemic reflections and future directions for language learning in secondary schools in the UK. Although perhaps when we came up with the title, we were hoping it would be post-pandemic, but I'm very conscious that particularly for those in secondary schools, it's very much still in the thick of it. But we're really delighted to have here today an expert panel who Paul will introduce shortly. And we would also like to thank Joe Dale, who we've been collaborating with on this event, and in particular, who's really taken the lead in bringing together this excellent group of speakers. As you might realise, Paul Spence and I work in higher education, but particularly recognising the pressures that language teachers have been under in schools this academic year and the relationship with digital technologies and getting to grips with those pressures. We've really enjoyed the opportunity to learn more and strengthen connections with schools. And this event also follows on two events we organised and collaborated on in, I think, March with primary schools. So we're very keen to now learn more about secondary schools.
So I'm Paul Spence from King's College London, and I'd also like to thank Joe Dale for helping to organise this and our expert panel for being present today. We set, when we conceived of this event, we basically set a number of questions, which very loosely the panel will be responding to, and we'll share those questions in the chat in a moment. But briefly, they are questions such as looking at how lockdown has transformed our engagement with digital media, platforms and tools in secondary education level language learning, what we've learned about synchronous versus asynchronous language learning, what opportunities exist for facilitating new forms of authentic second language communication and interaction in light of our experience during and post lockdown, and finally looking at how our use of digital or hybrid pedagogies in the language classroom can overcome digital divide. So without any further ado, I'll introduce the first of our speakers, who is Isabelle Jones. It gives me a very great pleasure to introduce Isabelle, who's an experienced head of languages and a qualified translator and interpreter with more than 25 years of experience in primary and second language teaching. And she's a member of the Association for Language Learning, the ALL Executive Council. Over to Isabelle.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm just going to start sharing my screen. Just to, so I've got this. Okay, right. So when we're thinking about how the way we're engaging with technologies has changed from lockdown onwards, really, it's been really very rapid, and I really do think it's kind of a new era. So we have not really had any digital lockdowns in any way, shape or form, but what used to be, let's say, the practice of a few has become overnight the norm, and that was a big shock to a lot of people. There was an obvious skills divide, and it was a steep learning curve for everybody, but with it came a whole host of real opportunities. And I think the MFL communities really stepped up and really engaged with this. And whether the CPD opportunities were formal or informal, certainly it was really a time of rapid change and rapid development. Also, what happened is we really saw the importance of encouraging self-regulation in learners, particularly with younger learners, which usually are not really as self-regulated as, let's say, student in higher education. So technology for all, well, we wanted it to be, but it really also highlighted a lot of things in terms of a divide. We also try to start using digital tools to mimic human interactions, particularly in language teaching, because obviously what we do is the interaction is the basis of teaching and learning. So we little by little try to pick up different tools to try to facilitate this interaction. So the big kind of synchronous versus asynchronous dilemma was really interesting, because I actually ended up doing both, like probably most of us. It really did depend on the actual individual situation. So it was quite complex, and it was not just one was necessarily always better than the other. Obviously, it was interesting to use asynchronous in the way that it was more focused in terms of studies, but synchronous was also really important in terms of supporting pupils and their mental health, and really meeting their needs for kind of direct interactions. So I did think both were really, really important. The issue we had with the synchronous is that it relied even more on self-regulation. And okay, you can send a Loom video, for instance, or something, or a video with explanation and activities, but you're obviously relying on the students, the pupils, to be self-regulated, which is, as we know, not always the case. That's not even talking about their actual access to technology. What was interesting for me was I did think that the synchronous interactions led to some kind of a new deal. So it's not always the pupils that were the most interactive face-to-face that were necessarily the most interactive online. And I found that really interesting. For some pupils, it was an opportunity to actually speak without having to put up with anybody staring at them. So they actually gave them confidence. But for some usually very confident pupils, they hated the fact they were talking into the abyss. And that was something they really found difficult. So really, it was about everybody getting used to this new kind of format, whatever the format was. One of the challenge was also immediate versus delayed feedback. I think particularly for a lot of teachers, providing the feedback when it was delayed really incurred a big increase in workload. So new opportunities, yes. We've now tried all this technology, and we know that we now live in a global Zoom village. It's not strange to have parties online or anything like that. So really, okay, I do want to take pupils back to the countries to speak the language when it's possible. But we now know that we've got a strong alternative, and it's viable. And because people had to experience this kind of remote socializing as well, it's something that we can build on really in language learning and teaching as well. For assessment, I did find it was quite challenging in terms of controlling the surrounding around the assessment, making sure there was no shortcut taken by students, for instance, particularly rethinking how writing and translation was set up as a task. So it was really interesting to have all sorts of interactions online through Twitter, through the Tilt webinars, to really find little tricks on how we can actually do this remotely as well. And the bigger thing for me was about overcoming digital divides. I started lockdown in a school, and I finished the following lockdown in a different school. My first school was a small independent school that was an iPad school, so all the pupils had access to all everything they needed really. And then I moved back into the state sector with a completely much more mixed audience. And it made me really acutely aware of the challenges posed. We had to send some printed packs home of PowerPoints we'd done. We had to make sure everything was smartphone friendly, because a lot of pupils were accessing the learning via phones, something I'd never had to do when I started remote teaching. So it was really about finding ways to make the technology accessible to everybody. And we found that really anything that is phone-based, or that any resource that can be accessed reasonably on the phone, was really the answer for us. Anything that, rather than have documents that can be edited online. So the big lesson was to keep it simple, phone friendly, and to make sure that we are training for all, not just the teachers, but students, because a lot of things is also depending on the school. My iPad school, all the pupils were really trained for accessing technology, but my current school, clearly they had not even had proper, trial run of using Teams. So it kind of gave us a lot of challenges. There we go. That's basically it.
Thank you, Isabelle. Some really interesting points there. Great. So I'm now going to move on to our second speaker, and it gives me pleasure to introduce Jane Basnett, whose widespread experience with e-learning, coaching, lesson planning, event management, and education technology. Jane's currently the head of modern foreign languages and director of digital learning at the Downe House School. Over to Jane.
Thanks for that. I'm having problems with my device, and I think that one of the issues we've got, in terms of digital divide, is when you have Wi-Fi issues, and I am definitely having Wi-Fi issues. So I wanted to share my screen. There we go. I am going to be able to. So thank you for that introduction. That's really very kind of you. I'm going to start by considering how, once I can find, there we are, by considering how lockdown really has transformed our engagement with digital media, platforms, and tools in language learning. So hopefully you can see my screen. So I'm in a privileged position of being able to teach in a school where we have one-to-one devices, Surface Pros. So for sure, my experience is really different to other people's. But in my opinion, and from my experience, the real benefit of lockdown is that engagement has improved. So where there were colleagues who resisted using technology and could see no benefit from tools, now they were forced really into using Teams, using Google Classroom, Microsoft tools, and so on. Zoom, of course. And whilst I wouldn't advocate using force, as a way forward, I'm much more carrot than stick. It's had the effect that teachers have resigned themselves to the fact that technology had to play a part in online and then hybrid learning. And more than that, and happily, in my view, teachers have been sort of galvanized into using technology in their classrooms now when we're back face to face. So essentially, we started here, a little bit of resistance for some people. I'm not saying for everybody. And then a resignation, okay, we are going to have to use technology, and then acceptance, oh, actually, it can work, and to the point where really we've got our fingers on the button of technology. And that's not to say that there aren't pockets of resistance, but I think that there's enough groundswell to ensure that technology remains part of our teaching and learning processes. And as I see it, it's important that we don't create a dichotomy. It's not technology and teaching, and it's not how we can use technology. It's how can technology enhance what we're doing in the classroom. And that's another positive, I think, another positive transformation. That's, I think people are thinking about that now. Teachers recognize that they need to start with the educational goal and then consider the tool that might enhance the procedure. And so I think classrooms have changed considerably, and you could say that teaching and learning with technology now are sort of inextricably linked. And I think that's how it should be, and I think we've moved a step closer to that. And there's obviously been challenges, as Isabelle just mentioned. These are kind of really well documented. We had to consider the working environment. As a parent myself of GCSE and A-level students, my scenario is different to somebody in my department who had 3 children under 7. That's a scenario that I can understand how awful it is. I'm glad I didn't have to live that, but a lot of people did. So how difficult was it to deliver those lessons and to be a student in a lesson when there's so much noise going on around and about? And then we needed to consider the devices we've got here, the challenges for many teachers, as Isabelle said, you know, what did we have? What did the students have? What was the Wi-Fi like? And in my own case, it's pretty ropey at the moment. And then the biggest impact, you know, obviously impact on our mental health, and then considering the lessons. So in terms of considering the lessons, I thought I'd have a quick look actually at some of the tools that have helped us with that transformation and the specific ways they've enabled us to enact change. So any of you who are on Twitter and a member of the MFL Twitterati will know that there are now so many tools that language teachers engage in and utilize to deliver their lessons. And I think we've all learned so much from each other. So I guess that's another positive transformation from lockdown. You know, the community spirit was always there, but now I think it's even tighter. So teaching online has meant that colleagues, you know, have had to remind themselves of best teaching practices. So these remain vital for successful lessons. In a nutshell, you know, what we're talking about here is right, reviewing material, questioning, modeling, and practice. You know, Rosenshine's principles of instruction. And these have had to be modified to reflect the fact that we were online. So I'd say of these modifications, the most important was to do with time. It became more important to reduce teacher talk, to provide a way and means for students to listen to instructions in their own time and to practice on their own and receive feedback, fast, effective feedback, so that they can still make progress. And that would also have to possibly be in their own time. So we're talking, you know, obviously that difference between synchronous and asynchronous. From my perspective, you know, lockdown pushed colleagues to consider how they could review material effectively, what tools could be used to question and assess learning, to practice writing and speaking. And I'm sure any of the attendees here today, looking on the right-hand side of the screen here, you know, they can see all the icons. You know, obviously we've got Teams, I've got Class Notebook for organisation, breakout rooms, fantastic for collaborative work and speaking, Flipperty, learning apps, Genially, for drill exercises, but not exclusively, you know, so many others, Canva, Sway, fantastic for creative, Flipgrid for recording oral work, just so many tools. And I think now lockdown, and that, you know, that is a transformation in our teaching, and these are tools that we can carry on using as we go on post-pandemic, whenever that will be. So that's it for me, really looking at how lockdown has how teaching has transformed through lockdown. So over to the next person.
Thank you, Jane, for some really fascinating points. So our next speaker is Daren White, who was a language teacher for 23 years at University of Portsmouth and Goldsmiths, former senior leader for 10 years, academic technology specialist, Google certified trainer, coach, innovator, and founder of myedtechbuddy.co.uk. Over to Daren.
Thanks, Paul, and welcome everyone. It's great to be invited along and great to be part of it. As Paul said there, I've been a language teacher for 23 years. I am still, because I'm a big believer in walking the walk as well as talking the talk. So I do still teach. I teach mainly Spanish these days, but I'm a Spanish specialist with French and German as well over the past few years. And I'm a self-taught learning technology specialist, having been told when I was at secondary school that IT was a bit of a flash in the pan, which was great careers advice. And I thank my former teachers for that greatly. I think for me, one of the things that came out of lockdown was I'd been through quite a journey with our schools for about 3 or 4 years prior to lockdown, where we'd been using Google Classroom and Google Docs and various other aspects of G Suite or Workspace as it is now for a number of different things. But there were only really a few of us that were using them in a lesson format. So when lockdown came, there was a massive need to rapidly upskill, as Isabelle and Jane mentioned. And inevitably that fell to likes of myself and a couple of other colleagues to do a huge amount of training across the trust. And I think one of the things I'm really, really proud of is just how well everybody adapted to that and how everybody threw themselves into it, both from an MFL perspective, but also, you know, across the curriculum in general. I think One of the things that frustrates me, and I'll get on my soapbox a little bit about these things, is that I think back to when I was at college, I think back to when I was at school, and we had fully equipped language labs where everyone would have their individual tape decks, which had been copied from the master, and you had control over that, and you had your sound cancelling earphones. And when you were doing things like listenings, you could rewind, fast forward, pause, do whatever you wanted to do, give yourself a little bit of thinking time, and you really had autonomy over what it was you were doing. And then when I started actually teaching, a lot of that was being stripped away, and we went back to normal classrooms, occasionally with a few Goombas in the corner with sort of 6 sets of headphones coming out of them and things like that. And when the digital development started to come along, I started to see opportunities that were really, really exciting. Obviously, it's an opportunity for people to learn new skills, students and teachers, but it was also a great opportunity to really advance that buy-in. And it gave us the opportunity to let students explore and have a lot more fun and creativity with the language than I think perhaps they have had before. And one of the reasons for that, I think, is partly, and I don't know whether it's a cultural thing these days with the social media fascination of not wanting things to be seen to be imperfect, that writing things down for students on paper in their books was becoming one of those things that they didn't want imperfections to be seen. So the fact that they could work on a collaborative whiteboard or on a Google Doc together, or actually, you know, just create a video or a sound bite or whatever it might be, and then delete it and improve it, that was a real game changer. And as Isabelle mentioned, I noticed a massive difference between those people that were quiet in class, who suddenly thrived online, and those that were the loudest in class really struggled when it came to working online. So there was some step backwards for some, and there was a step forwards for others. But for teachers, it was a real challenge, because we kind of went from, you know, teachers, we live in this world where we're the experts of everything. And we're expected to be the masters of our own classrooms, and our subject knowledge and everything else goes with it. So we live in a state of unconscious competence for the vast majority of our time. And then when all of a sudden you're asked to reinvent almost overnight what you do, you quite often move from that unconscious competence to conscious incompetence. And that's really scary. That takes us out of our comfort zone, and it puts us on the back foot. Particularly when you're dealing with technology and your Wi-Fi at home, and you know the neighbours making a noise in the middle of a lesson and whatever it might be. Or as I had a chicken bombing my classroom. You know, it's one of those things that you just have to get and deal with. And I think in the early days of lockdown, as teachers, there was not fascination, perhaps, a feeling that what we had to deliver was TV quality ready lessons. And a lot of people spent a lot of time recording things and thinking, well, I'm not quite happy with that. I'll redo it again. I want to edit this. And actually, as time grew on, people became a lot more relaxed, were less bothered about making mistakes, because that's real life. And in a classroom, we would laugh it off and we would just make a joke of it and make what we will of it. And I think that's really important online as well, because that personal aspect is vital. You know, we lack that personal interaction as such with the online. So I think the more personal we can make it, the better. And for me, that's where some of the great tools, and Jane mentioned so many there. Flipgrid was an absolute game changer in terms of not just getting students to speak, because a lot of our students, we found, didn't want to be on camera. So the minute that Flipgrid created the update where you didn't have to be on camera anymore, suddenly there was a huge uptake. And then you add in the things like the filters and everything else, and it becomes like a social media experiment for them. But what I loved was the ability to moderate. So I could make sure that nothing was live until I said so. And what I did with a lot of the students was say to them, look, it won't go live unless you tell me it's okay to go live. And I was able to get a lot more out of my students as a result of that, because they weren't worried about other people reading it or listening to it. And equally, if they were happy for it to go live, they were also able to get feedback from their peers as well. And it was really great to see likes popping up and comments popping up and students commenting on each other's. So Flipgrid was great, as was Screencastify Submit as well, because all of that interacts with Google Classroom, goes into your Google Drive, really easy to deal with. But then I also worked quite hard at upskilling in terms of things like Edpuzzle and Nearpod, which were fantastic in terms of being able to deliver products, deliver lessons, deliver videos, have low stakes assessment going on within them, and at the same time being able to check in and look and see what students were doing live, see how much of a video they've actually watched, see how many times they had to rewatch a certain section. And that's feedback we wouldn't necessarily get in the classroom. And I think that's really, really powerful. And then Moat was an absolute game changer as well. The ability to give students quick feedback with intonation, with humor, with pronunciation as a language teacher was fantastic. It enabled everything to get a little bit more personal. I think the quality of feedback improved and the quality of response to that feedback improved. So that was awesome. And then when Moat with Slides came along, and you've got the ability to create your own audio and embed that as instructions within a slideshow, things like that, absolute game changer. And then more recently, I've been experimenting with Canva, as Jane mentioned, and also Adobe Spark as alternative ways of students communicating, coming up with memes, coming up with short videos and their own web pages and things like that. I was also really fortunate to get the opportunity to be a judge for a Speak Out competition for a school in Mexico, where the English-speaking students were all asked to deliver a 4-minute speech. And I was asked to be one of the judges on the panel there remotely. Obviously, I didn't get to go to Mexico. And that was brilliant, because to be able to experience other people's language learning, and I was able to kind of relay that information to my students, and they were really keen to do similar sorts of things. So they started creating more of their mini presentations in Flipgrid and things like that. And that what I call it scrapability, that ability to rub it all out and not worry about what was there and start again, whether it's whiteboard FI, whether it's the whiteboard factor within Nearpod, whether it's a Jamboard, whether it's a voice note that you can re-record if you're not happy with it, I think is absolutely vital. Moving forward, I hate the term soft skills. I think it's really, really, it's a misnomer, because they're not soft skills, they're vital skills. And those communication skills and those collaboration skills are absolutely vital for our students. I think it's one of those things that we've got to, as a community, look at the demands of our curriculum, how it aligns with society in general, update everything. I've lost count the number of times now students have said to me, why would you telephone a hotel in Spain to book a room? You just go on booking.com, wouldn't you, sir? And you can't, it's hard to argue with that, because even me, I wouldn't think twice about doing it. So I think there's a lot we can take from it. There's a lot we've got to hold on to. There's some bits that maybe aren't quite so important, but that personal aspect of it, the individual feedback and the ability to meet the student in their own space, I think is vital. And yeah, people might say, online learning isn't right for everyone, but then neither is in-class learning. And I think it's important we learn to strike a balance. So that's me.
Thank you, Daren, and some really interesting examples there. Please do keep the questions coming in. We've got 2 more speakers, but we'll take questions at the end. So please do feel free to post your questions in the chat. But now it gives me pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who is Esmeralda Salgado. She's an advanced skill teacher, head of modern foreign languages and Spanish and digital learning lead at King's Eli in Cambridgeshire, where she's also responsible for a modern foreign languages Erasmus program. Over to Esmeralda.
Hi, thank you very much. Lovely to be here. Thank you for your presentation. Well, let's share my screen in here. Okay. Share. Right. So, I wanted to talk about, obviously, I agree with everything that everybody has said. I can agree more, really. And one of the things I wanted I was thinking about giving it a title. And at the end of the day, this was the best I came up with, which is basically giving students wings, because that's basically what my experience has been with the technology and the lockdown. And so, yes, and how it has enabled me and the department to really look at things in completely different way, and making students become superheroes in a way and take responsibility for their own learning. I think it's been a fantastic experience. So from the point of view of how all this lockdown has transformed our teaching, for me, the important thing is that and that's why I think it's about giving the students wings, taking the languages outside the classroom and the accessibility. Before, my lessons used to be the classrooms. I used to leave, the bell was out and everybody was out. And then suddenly they could access to all my resources. They could access and they could practice their Spanish on the bus. They could do it, in the library. They could do it in the park. They could do it, in the bedroom, and they can hear my voice and they can interact with the things I had prepared for them. And I thought that was very, very, very powerful, because yes, for those who were really keen, they actually had the opportunity to practice it outside in a completely different environment. I thought it was very important as well to think outside the box. Suddenly we were both in this situation. Jane was saying that we didn't basically wish for, but actually they forced us to think out the box and doing things differently. And I thought that was very, very important, because I think one of the things that the technology that allows us to do is to do the same thing that you would do in the lessons, but in a completely different way, and allows you to practice the language using all the different apps, some of the ones basically that Jane has mentioned, with the same language. So it is great for retrieval practice, and it's great for reinforcing their core language. And I thought that was very, 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 very important. Well, I thought before there's all this new technology and uses, we used to move on very quickly with a new topic, and the fact that we could use the same thing done in different ways, in different angles, was very powerful. And I think as well, it's been a revolution on homework tasks. Before, my homework tasks, like 5-6 years ago, used to be a lot of worksheets and learning, and that was it. Now suddenly your homework could be a video, your homework could be doing a speaking, your homework, in Flipgrid, listening to your own voice, listening to me in a video, listening to a Bitmoji and doing something with it. So I thought that was very, very powerful. And of course, the most important thing is that now that we've come, I've definitely been come back to the classroom. I refuse to go back to the way it was. Our department has refused to do that, and now we have a blended learning situation, which I think is absolutely fantastic. About synchronous and asynchronous learning, I did both. I agree with Isabelle was saying. I don't think it's one better than the other, but for me was the power of asynchronous learning and how that allows the independent skills. And again, it's about taking the classroom, the MFL classroom, outside the four walls of the school, and how actually you can have a video, the power of interactive videos with a lot of different activities that kids can do and work with them and make the kids independent. I thought that was very, very, very powerful. And of course, always in conjunction with things like OneNote, Teams, Google Classroom, and from a blended learning approach. I thought that was very, very good as well in my experience. And what I wanted to talk a lot as well, seeing how everything has been working, is the new forms of authentic second language communication and interaction within the classroom. The kids have been able to create real context within the classroom to communicate, but also with partners. We have partners from with an Erasmus that we are basically very lucky. It's our last Erasmus, sadly. But what is been very good, all the different activities, even though we have not been able to travel, that we can do with our partners, even though we are far away. So we've been carrying on virtual exchanges, and we've been carrying on, and we've actually done 2 virtual Erasmus mobilities using Google Meet and using Google Earth and using Padlet, where the kids were communicating with each other, and using as well Google Documents, so everybody was working together towards in groups within the same document. And I thought that's extremely powerful. Also, what I loved as well, things like platforms such as, for example, Text in the Story, that allows you to create similar looking material, so real artifacts, so that what the kids normally would use in the normal in their phones. And I think that's been very big motivating tool, and very motivating for all the students in general. And of course, from the point of view of assessments, MSM forms, quizzes, Quizlet, carousel learning apps, all these have really been very powerful to save time, I think, and give personal feedback, especially if used in conjunction with OneNote of the Google Classroom. So all those things really have revolutionized the way we teach. And the beauty of it is that we're still using it now that we are back in the classroom, and I think that's very important. And the other one I want to talk about a little bit, and I think it's very important, is about the digital tools and educational goals. I think it's very super important that we don't use basically just all the tools because they are gimmick and they look good, but I think it's very important that we use them because there is a reason to use them, and we need to map them out in the curriculums. I think it's very important to have a digital strategy, and in our case, in our school, the digital strategy was using the Rosenschild's principle. So what we did is, how can we use all these Rosenschild's principles in the normal teaching and actually apply them to a digital era and a digital contest. And it was fantastic to see how so many of the tools that we actually doing are very good for modeling, are very good for asking questions, for checking for understanding, and all these really nice principles. And actually that was quite important for the educational goals. So we don't just do something for the sake of it, because it's gimmick, because it's actually good, but actually there is a reason for it. Just to avoid division, I think what is very important as well is that you don't need to be a master of technology. That's been one of the things I've learned. You can do little tweaks, little things in your lessons with a little bit, with a flippity, with a little bit, for example, with a genially, with a little bit of wheel of names, and still do things that you do normally with face-to-face. Do the little tweaks so it's accessible to all, and especially things that you can access through your mobile. I agree with Isabelle that not everybody will have the opportunity to have a computer or a laptop. So what kind of those tools that we use actually are compatible with a mobile, so it can be done, it can be accessed by all, and the things that don't require teaching 100% the way that you've always been doing things, but actually enhances the things that you've done traditionally. And that for me has been the biggest thing. And of course, supporting communities. And I think MFL, the Twitterati, for example, on Twitter has been fantastic in this, how everybody has helped each other, how ideas have been floating around in the internet. And I think that's been absolutely fantastic as well, to avoid division and to give ideas on how to implement things little by little. So I think those are basically my main takeaways. But for me, the main thing is this now has allowed us to create, for the first time ever, a blended learning environment, truly blended learning environment. And I think, at least from my school, my experience, people have worked really hard to upskill themselves, and actually they're quite reluctant after all the hard work to go back to a square zero again, and actually they're quite happy to embrace it. And the other big aspect I would definitely enhance and definitely put forward is the fact how the students have become more motivated, especially the low ability kids. That normally for some they're not very keen in writing in paper. Some of them find it hard. Some of them cannot write very, very well. But the fact that you can do learning apps, the fact that you can write on a Padlet, the fact that you can do it something orally with a wheel of names, suddenly it makes the language accessible to them, and then they start practicing the same vocabulary, the same structures in really many different ways, and that reinforces the language, and then they become better at it at the same time. So all things is all the gains, and I cannot see really anything negative about it, apart obviously from the sometimes it's technology, and sometimes it doesn't work, and sometimes it's frustrating. But overcoming those hurdles, and that is for me. I think that's within time.
Thank you, Esmeralda, for another very thorough treatment of the topic. And it gives me great pleasure now to introduce our final speaker, who is Helen Myers. Helen Myers is former assistant head at the Ashcombe School in Dorking and chair of the London branch of ALL, the Association for Language Learning. Over to Helen.
There, can you see my screen, the impact of lockdown? And can you see your faces as well? Let's just put your faces over there.
Yes, we can. All good.
Okay, thank you. I've been listening with great interest to everybody, and there are so many things that, yes, I agree with. I'm hoping that this perhaps will put things, particularly from, if you like, a teacher manager point of view, as to how I felt that ICT has enhanced, has helped with teaching. But I am starting from what do we want to do anyway, and then how has ICT helped that, rather than from the point of view, oh, we've got this wonderful ICT, how can we apply that? So I've just got about 8 slides here looking at aspects when you're planning for teaching in a secondary context. First one is to do with management, and this isn't just MFL, as to what happened past typically before the pandemic, and then what did the pandemic bring about, and then what about the future? And I would particularly say that there are some schools who really were well ahead of the game, who were already doing these things. So I know that, for example, I know that I went right at the beginning of the pandemic, I learned so much from the people who've just been speaking. They were already doing it in their schools. I was already doing quite a lot as well. But just to be able to say that that's something where there are some people who were doing this already, but it depended so much on what resource you've got. And that's where I think that's going to come through every slide. It goes back to what Isabelle was saying right at the beginning. In the end, the key thing is access. So some people may want to be carrying on doing things, but they can't. But nevertheless, there are lots of positive things. So these are obvious things, I suppose, that in the past, managers and teachers had a choice as to whether or not to use ICT. We were forced to use it in the pandemic. And of course, that meant that people did train themselves up, but there still was an inequality depending on the expertise of the teacher, pupil access. But I felt that very clearly that got better and better, especially because we had the lockdown, then we got back to school where we were able to then train people up, importantly, the students up as well, because I found they did need that teacher interaction to tell them how to use things. So the second lockdown, we were in a better position. I feel for the future, most of us now have got an infrastructure in place so that we can use it, at least for home access, homework. Really, some people are very fortunate to be in schools where they've got their own devices. There are many, many schools which haven't got that. So even if they wanted to carry on doing it in their teaching lessons, they can't. However, perhaps more for homework now, people will be setting that sort of work, knowing that the students know how to use and access these apps, and if they've got the ICT. In the past, certainly for a manager, IT equipment was not necessarily a priority. For those of us who love tech, I have to say, I think it was a feeling, yes, at last people realise we do need this. So that certainly meant that schools are now in a much better position. And as I've said before, I think that that's going to be sustainable probably for the future. We're certainly finding that teachers, even if they can't use IT in the classroom, are setting homeworks, for example, using Teams, or able to monitor things using class charts, which before they weren't doing. I think it's worthwhile talking, though, about schools do have budgetary difficulties. There are some who may have put a lot of money into IT that might have a knock-on effect now. And then the involvement of parents. Obviously, our ideal is that parents are interested or involved. They were forced, weren't they, to be much more involved during the pandemic. And it may well be that that's something which will be a positive of this. Certainly, I've found other schools like ours have decided we're going to have all parents' evenings online from now on. That really worked. So those are things which are not just MFL, that's for anywhere. And these next slides are really just thinking from the teaching of languages, what difference does ICT make? I mean, I still love, and I think lots of people love, the face-to-face. You like being present with the students, particularly with languages. I think you can have control over what's happening, and importantly, you can pick up, even if you've got 30 in a class, you can pick up who's understanding, can't you? You can pick up, and when you're watching group work, what they can do. And that was more difficult, I think, when it was online, because a lot of students didn't want to show their faces. Faces, I think, are really important ways of being able to show whether you're getting things, whether you're even there to be listening to it. So I think that was a disadvantage. It was okay if they had their cameras on and you had keen people, but and ways you got around it. Yes, we recorded ourselves on video. Lots of people did that. We spent hours and hours doing that. And for the students who watched us on video and who'd want to watch it again if they didn't understand, that was great. However, there really wasn't any control over whether or not they did that. The ideal for me was finding things like Textivate, where you can put sequences of work and you can track, or I've put Microsoft quizzes there. I don't know how I got that. Microsoft quizzes, where if they knew that you were going to know whether or not they'd gone through it, that was really helpful. There are other things as well. So I think as far as the future goes for presenting, this is to do with presenting work. We've got things which are available now. I'm now I'm using all the things that I prepared for this time last year with my current year 10. And certainly you can supplement for students who perhaps need to look at things again or need to be extended. For the practice stage, I think that's where we always were, any of us who had access to a computer, and we used ICT an awful lot. We used technology loads for practicing things. So, for the presentation stage, I think that's where the presence of the teacher, frankly, really does help. When it comes to the practicing, that's something that people can do. It's still lovely to be in the classroom though, isn't it? Where you can have fun, you can laugh, you can spot the misconceptions and intervene, but there are so many ways that you can practice with these tools that we found, where you're interacting with the technology and getting this immediate feedback, which is a fantastic use of technology. In the future, I think now people who were not using technology in that way will have been exposed to that and will perhaps use that for homeworks, even if they can't get access to it in school. As far as the production stage of languages, that's where I think, when you're in the classroom, it's so helpful to have the teacher there on hand to be able to help to focus them while they're producing things, so they don't spend too long on deciding what font they want or whatever it is. There is something where it really is helpful to have you there at the productive stage. You can oversee group talk. Yes, of course, we could go into little rooms, I suppose, when we were in our teams, when we had breakout rooms. Still not the same, I don't think, as being in the classroom, be able to see whether they were on task. And when it came to writing, you can supervise the validity of that. But we did have ways, didn't we, of giving this, being able to help them when they were producing things. But it was it used up a lot of time feeding back. I mean, weren't there people who were just exhausted? You'd been teaching and then you'd be looking at all of their individual work. So, it wasn't necessarily straightforward. For me, the biggest thing, which I suppose this forced me to do, because I couldn't do speaking in the class, was to get more and more students recording themselves. I learned so much about the quality of the pronunciation of my individual students. And that's just laziness on my part. I should have been doing it before. We have access to computer rooms. I should have been doing more of that. But almost because I wasn't there in the classroom, it forced me to do it. And I was so delighted at the way that all students, including the less able, would just, if you gave them a link to click on, which took them to Sanico, and all they had to do was click and repeat something or listen to you say something and then repeat, they did it. And it was done in about 10 minutes. And my goodness, I really felt that I knew their pronunciation. When it came to doing the speaking endorsements, I was in a much better position to know how a lot of them were through doing that. Esmeralda, I know you did a lot on links, you do a lot of links live with schools, but you've given a fantastic webinar about how you use the internet to be able to do that, even if you couldn't actually go there. So yeah, for the future, we've learned lots of things which we'll be able to apply. As far as resources are concerned, there is equal access, isn't there, when you don't have to do it online. online, not necessarily equal access because they didn't necessarily have the interactivity, but the things you could access, if you had access, were exciting. They could get to audio, they could get to video and use that independently. Assessment, again, I love being in the classroom. I feel that I can pick up quite quickly how they're getting on. When you're doing it online, it can be done. It just takes quite a lot of organisation to have some sort of branching activity that you do something, and if you don't manage, we'll go to that. But it can be done, and once you've learnt how to do it, that's something we can use in the future, I think. And then as far as the summative assessment, this is where we were stuck, weren't we? But someone, I just put this word tricks in there. I think someone mentioned about the fact that there are packages for controlling what people are doing, and there are tricks that you can use. But really, if you want absolutely valid, reliable assessment to see how they're doing, often it's in class with you watching them. But at least we know the options which are there. Final slide is the rapport bit. I love being back in the classroom. I love being able to see them. You can show your personality, there's the presence, you can arrange pairs and groups to be together. But this has already been mentioned. There were two ways that it happened in the pandemic. With some students, they really did get on better. I felt they were bolder almost than they would have been in the classroom, but many others who would turn their video off and didn't necessarily want to be involved. So I think as far as the future goes, we've all had this experience of being able to relate to children and do things not in the classroom. And that does give scope for the idea of doing tutorials, extracurricular, out of hours work. So I think that's the end.
Thank you, Helen. That's a great way to round off the opening presentations. And I think we now move on to questions. So Joe, if you would like to take over.
Fantastic. So thank you ever so much to the speakers. Some brilliant opening remarks. I'll be making lots of notes, which is great. We've had some questions which I'm going to put to everyone now. If someone is desperate to answer a question, feel free to use the hand up signal in reactions, and then I can pass over to you. But we've got a question from Laura, who's been an absolute star. She's asked, I think, three questions, sorry, so far, which is great. Feel free to carry on putting questions in the chat as well. So the first question is in relation to language labs that Daren mentioned. So Laura has said, does anyone actually have a language lab in their school anymore? We don't. Thoughts on their use now? I would love the resources, but I would want my timetable lessons so it doesn't become a sacrifice of classroom learning. Any thoughts on that, Jane?
Yeah, we used to have a language lab. It's still there, and I've been trying to get rid of it for about 2-3 years, because once we had our Surface Pros, we just didn't see the need for it. The Surface Pro does everything that we need. Even just with audio from in class notebook, but there are other ways where, with Flipgrid we use all the time, and everybody, Esmeralda's mentioned it, and Daren mentioned it. We just don't need it. And at one point before class notebook and Microsoft dictation got so good, I could even get students to check their own pronunciation by using the dictation function in OneNote, because if they didn't say it properly, then it wouldn't type it out properly. Whereas now, unfortunately, OneNote has got a little bit too good for its own, too clever, frankly. Anyway, yeah, I mean, I think language labs, their days are not numbered; they're over.
Interesting. Helen, are language labs days numbered? What do you think?
Well, I think the type of language lab that Daren was describing, I remember teaching with that and I loved it. It was really good. They were all in their little booths and they could control it. And I think that when technology came along, when we were in 1998, we became a language college, we decided, well, really, yes, by having the computer, you had everything with it, because that was when you could bring in the audio and the video. And I think that, Jane, if we could afford for every child to have their own Surface Pro, probably yes, that would be the way. And I still would use something like I very much like the Sanico platform, because that to me is a very tidy way of being able to organize what they do. But if you can't afford that, then having, and I think fighting for having a room which is equipped with 32 computers and headsets is essential for languages. And I think you should really fight for that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm in a privileged position, so I totally get that.
That's lovely. Daren, who brought up the language lab question.
Yeah, I would just agree with what Helen said. I totally agree with Jane as well. And for me, it's how we replicate that environment. And my concern is, and Jane, like you say, you're in a privileged position. Not everybody's able to be one-to-one. Quite a lot of computer rooms are 24 computers in a room with 32 students. Or when budget's made available, somebody says, well, let's get a computer room. What do they look like? Well, we put computers around the edge, and that's what happens, and you don't have headphones, and that doesn't necessarily get factored into the question. So I think it's really important that you have an IT voice in all teaching and learning and budget making decisions at a senior level, because people won't appreciate necessarily all the different nuances of that kind of thing. But my biggest concern at the moment, and it'd be interesting to see what other people's opinions are, is the fact that, you know, the government are trying to, for want of a better word, blindside us with other things, with the threat of banning mobile phones, which actually, for a large number of students, are so beneficial in a language classroom in terms of just recording yourself and hearing what it sounds like back, or taking a recording of somebody else and then listening to it later, and those kind of things. And I'm really worried that actually that's going to result in a step backwards rather than a step forward.
Fantastic. Esmeralda, I saw you had your hand up. Do you want to come in here on your thoughts?
Yes, well, we do have a language lab. I'm already between Jane and what Helen says, and Daren. I can see ways to simulate the language lab. So if I wanted, I didn't need it. Basically, as long as the kids bring their headphones, pretty much. However, depends on the system that you're using. We are actually using, I know this is not a marketing thing, but we use Sanacom, and the quality of the audio and the quality of the things that you can do in the recording cannot be, it doesn't compare to OneNote, or it doesn't compare to, or, for example, Flipgrid. As much as I love them and I use everything, so we still have the old-fashioned language lab. And what we do is we have a timetable, and we take the kids to once every 2 weeks, and we concentrate mainly on listening, and they can do text to insert audio within a question, a lot of little things that actually would be very difficult to do unless you got a program like Audacity or things like that. Will I be able to survive without it? Of course I could. It's not as necessary, but I also maybe it's a little bit of a luxury, but I actually find it really, really useful as well. So I wouldn't get rid of my language lab just yet.
Lovely. It's great to hear the range of opinions. That's lovely. Isabelle, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just to add to what people were saying, I think the key is that if we have a computer room, it's designed for linguists, because if you share it with other departments, they don't get that we need sound, that we need to be able to record. The number of times you're in a room, then you go into a non-specialist room and you say, how do you do sound? They go, sound? What do you want sound for? So all these little things are actually making a big difference. And also personally, headphones are a bit of a nightmare for me at the minute. Because obviously they need to bring their own, and a lot of computers do not have the Apple kind of jack that basically they've got headphones for their phone that don't plug into computers. So we've had all sorts of issues with that. So practical things like that can really make the access quite difficult for multimedia. That's it, really.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's a really, really important point. Definitely. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for your answers on that question. We now have a question from Ruth, which is directed to Daren. So I'll ask Daren first, but then we can have other people chime in as well. That'd be great. So this is to Daren. You mentioned that recordings are okay when it's not TV quality. I believe that's true for the first iteration, but can this level of quality be repeated without being criticised for low production quality? What do you think about that, Daren?
I laughed when I saw that one, not because I laughed at the question, but I can 100% kind of envisage people sitting at home going, blimey, what's going on there? And oh, look at that in the background. I think, it really doesn't matter. There's so many tools out there now, like I'm using now, where you can put a virtual background in, which just makes things look a lot more clear and a lot more tidy from a starting point. And then I think you have to accept that there are going to be errors, there are going to be mistakes, and anybody who's not willing to accept that, quite frankly, isn't in a position to be judging the quality of our teaching or anything else, as far as I'm concerned. because if you go to work every day and nothing goes wrong, well, good luck to you. Particularly when you're dealing with 32 children and technology and your own Wi-Fi and people knocking in the door and Amazon turning up at the same time, and you know, power cuts and all of this kind of stuff that went on during lockdown, because you know, we were in our own homes and we were looking after our own children at the same time. So I think it's one of those things. There are things you can do. I mean, I used made massive use of WeVideo and Loom, just to kind of make things easy, accessible, but a little bit more interesting. So I did some videos with green screens involved and various things like that, just so that we had lessons from France and from Spain, and I'd be stood in the middle of, you know, the courtyard at the Louvre for a lesson and things like that. That was the Louvre, not the loo. Didn't do it that way. And also, you know, if you're not confident with editing and things like that, there's tools out there like Type Studio, which are fantastic, where, you know, you can upload a video, it will produce this transcript, and then you edit the transcript and that edits the video for you. So you take out the bit of text you don't want, and that removes that bit of the video. So it just smooths everything out, and it's really, really simple and a lot of the time free. So I think we worry too much about what people think, probably because we've worked in high stakes environments where lesson observations have been so key for so long that we're worried about people watching what we're doing. I think actually the vast majority of students and parents were blown away by the quality of what they saw during lockdown.
That's fantastic. Isabelle.
I wanted to add, for the first time ever, though, we had parents actually sitting in lessons live. So that was adding to the pressure, really. And it was quite interesting when we didn't realize and they gave us feedback later on. I thought, oh, right, okay. So that from that point of view, it was quite a bit of novelty for us.
That's great. I'd like to ask Esmeralda now to speak. I particularly liked when you talked about the flexibility of the homeworks that the students were doing. What was your thoughts on the quality of their audio or the video when you gave them more of a free rein on their homeworks?
Well, it was very good, and I agree as well with Helen. I never used to do that before, and it was absolutely fantastic to listen to them. And actually, because we use OneNote, we were happy. We were very lucky we had a very good platform, robust, that we can rely on. I could give them feedback myself on the OneNote at the same time, which was actually very, very quick, very fast, much better than just have to write down, you know, what would have done normally. So I would have listened to them and would listen. That was really good. By the way, you had to pronounce juego with a h, and then as I repeat after me. And then they used to then reply to my little answer as well with another audio. So it was a little bit like a conversation individual. I thought that was very, very, very powerful. And the quality actually was very good. And I thought at the beginning they wouldn't want to do it because nobody likes listening to themselves with their voices, but because they knew it was a recording between them and me, and they knew they wouldn't be able to let anyone listen to them, they actually were very good at it, and they were not shy. And then later they introduced Flipgrid. And then because with the Flipgrid, you can put the emotive and all that kind of thing. Then it became like a TikTok. I call it, this is like a video TikTok. And they could put that things coming in and all that. And it was like a game for them. And then in fact, they become much more confident. And funny enough, this week we've been doing orals with the year 10s. And I was dreading it. And it was like, oh my God, how are they going to be? You know, because this year we haven't done proper oral, you know, like 1-to-1 for a whole 10. And actually, some of them done so well. And then you wouldn't have noticed that they have not been having proper face-to-face oral activity for a whole term pretty much. And I thought that was very, very impressive. And something I was telling them, this is brilliant. This is because you've been listening to all these videos I've been recording for you, and you've been interacting with me. I used to create my YouTube channel, and I agree with Daren. I use Loom. They're full of mistakes. And I never went back to record it again. Is that's it? It will have to do. And they were listening to it. They were repeating after me. They were writing the answers in OneNote, and I think actually they become better at it. That in some ways better than when they come in the lessons in a way. And so I think the homework is absolutely fantastic, and also to do homework listening activities. That before used to be very rare, so not just oral, also the listening. So the listening has also improved a lot.
That's amazing. I love hearing about how, say, Daren is using Moat. You're using OneNote with the audio feedback, as Jane is as well, I'm sure. Do you think that you used audio feedback a lot more during the pandemic that you did before the pandemic? And do you think that that's something which the students have actively preferred compared to written feedback, or is it similar?
Me personally, I mean, my students, they prefer the audio feedback, and where they've got used to now, they come, because now we obviously we're in the classroom, everybody brings their headphones, and for 5 minutes everybody's in silence, and they just put the headphones, they listen to me, and then they record sometimes, even something if they have to repeat, or it's part of the next prep there, and they actually like it, and so yes, that's what they, especially as well, because my writing used to be, it's not the greatest. I think that's part of the problem as well. And because you say more, it's more personalized. You say, go to number, to this particular sentence, to this line. Look at this again. Look at that. Remember how you conjugate this verb. You would never do that in writing. So it would have been checking this, check that. And I think that's become definitely more powerful. I still do the writing as well, don't get me wrong, I still do, and the ticking and all that, but I complement it, and my feedback, or the time I spend marking, has been reduced massively thanks to technology, absolutely massively. That's one of the things I'm very grateful, apart from the fact I don't need to be carrying the books either.
That's amazing. Jane, any thoughts on audio feedback?
Yeah, I think one of the really powerful parts for audio feedback, in conjunction with the class notebook for us, is that sometimes when I get a moment, I may dip into the students' work to see how they're going, even if the due date is another week off, and I can leave them a little audio feedback and say, this is really good, but actually focus on this, or I like what you've done so far, but don't forget, I'm looking for certain structures. So that's kind of much more informal, but in the old days I wouldn't have done it. But the fact that we're working using this kind of technology, and I can see what they're doing, I think it provides that fast feedback, but also helps students to take further steps before they even submit their work, and I find that incredibly powerful.
That's amazing. Daren, can I ask you to sort of talk about well, I know you mentioned Moat already, but it sounds like it's been a real game changer. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit more on what the children have said to you about the power of using something like Moat for audio feedback?
Yeah, absolutely. They've been really positive about it. Partly, during lockdown, they were able to hear my voice, which was a big point, because obviously, who wouldn't want to listen to my voice, right? So they were very keen. So we want to hear you. But it did mean, we spend a lot of time telling young people these days when they're dealing with each other, don't read too much into what's in text. Sometimes it can be misinterpreted. You can easily read something the wrong way. And then we give them written feedback and wonder why sometimes they don't understand it. So I think that side of it has been really powerful, because I've been able to, really sound enthusiastic when they've done something absolutely brilliant, but also be really encouraging where there's a slight issue that they need to change, but you've been able to put their mind at rest. And like Esmeralda was saying, you would never say, well, that's really close, and if you just did this and did that, it will be fantastic, so don't worry too much about it. You would never do the nicey hand around the shoulder bit or anything like that. So in spite of the fact, as Esmeralda said, my marking load reduced massively, the quality of my marking increased massively, and the students responded more to it. And I also use it I use Moat with Gmail as well. So at the end of every week on a Friday, I try and use Moat with Gmail and send to a few parents just to say how well a couple of students have done during the course of the week. And because it's a voice message, I get a lot more response from parents, because I tend to get a reply saying, oh, that was brilliant, thanks, I've played it to so-and-so. Whereas if I just send a normal email, I don't tend to get a response. So that was interesting as well from my perspective.
Yeah, I love it. I love hearing it. That's absolutely brilliant. I see, Jane, you've got your hand up. Do you want to wrap us up on this and then we'll move to another question? Or have you just not put your hand down?
I think that's a legacy.
A legacy hand. Okay. Right. Well, let's move on to the next question. This is actually in relation to your slide, I think, Jane, which was again from Laura, the lovely Laura, which of these apps, etc., that you showed us are people still using now with in-person teaching? I know some people replied to this in the chat, but it'd be nice to hear it on the recording as well. So Jane, do you want to kick us off with that? Are you using all the tools you showed us that you were using in lockdown in face-to-face as well now?
For sure, I am using all of those tools. You know, I was using them before lockdown, and I guess I used them a lot more during lockdown, but I still use them all, you know, not all the time. I use them when it's right to use them. You know, when I want to do assessment, then I'll use Microsoft Forms, or I'll use quizzes, or I'll use, you know, quizzes and Microsoft Forms, my best ones for assessment. If I want the students to do some of their own, you know, learning and assessing their own learning, I'd use Carousel. I see a place for them in the learning process, and they're always going to be a part of my of the learning process. And I think that, you know, for many of us, I'm hoping, you know, that's what I want to happen with my department. I want us to use those tools, and I think the students have got used to using them, and they like using them for various reasons. You know, some of those tools on there are really fantastic for, you know, for drill exercises, doing repetitive things where they can embed structures and phrases. That's really important in language learning, and to do it in different ways. For example, like Textivate gives you that opportunity to do. Then it's a you know, it's a no-brainer. We've got to use those tools. That's, you know, that's my opinion, and I think that students enjoy using them. They're engaging, and they learn from using them. So yeah, I use them all, and I'm going to carry on.
Fantastic. One of the things that's been mentioned by everybody is accessibility. I wanted to ask Helen in relation to accessibility, what tools are you going to be, or are you carrying on using now in the face-to-face classroom that you were using during the lockdown, and what issues has that thrown up in relation to accessibility?
So really, just talking on behalf of a school, I suppose. Well, we're not a typical state school because we have got quite a lot of IT. I mean, we've been building it up over the years, but we know that we can't have everybody having IT at the same time. So the main thing that people are still using is Teams. That has been a big difference, that people are using that as a way of communicating with children, as a way of making it so that parents and others can see what's going on through class charts. So class charts and Teams as a communication tool mainly. I mean, personally, because I am part-time and I've gone around and managed to find the odd places where nobody was using computers in a geography room, for example. I have to confess I've been taking my classes in still, and I'm still using it and absolutely loving it. But the trouble is, it means that things that I am carrying on producing, I can't then share with other people to use. So that's the thing where I think the ideal, obviously, is if you've got a whole department able to be able to, I mean, I just love your idea about the Surface Pros. I don't know, Daren, whether you think that's something where schools could afford that. I mean, we've heard of schools up in Scotland where they've done that, because when you're in a local education authority, they've got more powers over where the money goes. Yeah. And I'm thinking back to, you know, just you know, what was it? It was 1998, I think, when, you know, the then government really wanted to push technology, and there was money there, and it was ring fenced for technology. And that meant that schools did get on board. And it meant that we were way ahead. We had difficulty finding schools in other countries to deal with because nobody else was as advanced as we were. But then it was dissolved in, I think it's 2010, 2011, that stopped. I must stop. I babble on, don't I?
No problem. Daren, do you want to come in quickly? And then I'm aware we've got quite a few other questions, but over to you, Daren.
Just in answer to Helen's question, I do think, I think one-to-one devices is absolutely the way to go. We're a Google school, so we would go with one-to-one Chromebooks, and you're talking sort of £180 per person. And there's so many lease schemes you can do, you know, buy them after 3 or 4 years, and they're still good for 6 or 7 years at least afterwards. So that's the first thing. I think, you know, if we can create one-to-one environments, it doesn't mean you've got to use your device for the whole of the lesson, every lesson. And there's a worry, I think, with parents. If a child comes home and says, "Oh, I used my iPad in every lesson," it doesn't mean they used it for everything in that lesson. It might be they took a photo with it. End of story. You know. So that's the one part of it. And then the other thing I think, which is really important is that when it comes to devices, computer rooms, all these kind of things, that yes, we get funding, but what tends to happen because of pressures is schools get forced to spend it. And then what doesn't happen is, or doesn't happen enough, is they don't have a fallback or a contingency for renewal down the line. So you get a fantastic new suite of computers in, and then 3 years, 4 years later, you haven't got the money to replace them because there's been no kind of ability to set that aside, because if you don't spend your budget, you lose it.
Yeah, great point. That's fantastic. I am aware of time, so we're going to crack on with another question. This one's from Naomi, which is it's a great question. These experiences are so valuable, but I was wondering about the teachers who maybe are less confident or intimidated by the range of technologies and their potential. Perhaps Helen might have a view in particular on how to support those staff. So maybe can we start with you, Helen, on this, and then I'll ask, well, if anyone puts their hand up who wants to say something, that'd be lovely. But over to you, Helen, first of all, if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, this may be very obvious, but I think it really is a senior management responsibility to ensure that people have the training that they need. Certainly in our school, we have the idea of an entitlement to the curriculum, so that we've always said that we don't have a situation where only the children who've got the keener teachers on IT get the technology. Everybody should have that. So we see that as a senior management responsibility to ensure that. So for us, it's a question of, even at interview stage, checking that people are comfortable with the fact they will have to do that and learn about technology. And then within the department, as people come in, that's part of their induction, really, that they use that. So there is almost that expectation. There isn't a feeling of, oh, don't worry. We wouldn't say to someone, oh, don't worry, if you don't like it, you don't have to use it. It is, by all means, we're going to help you. We'll be there. So, for example, if somebody comes into the school, hasn't used it before, I would take a lesson and invite them to watch me. And that used to be the case. I have to say, recently we've had absolutely superb people who've come through the system. It's been part of their training. It's part of what you have to do when you're training to be a teacher. So it's not something that we've come across recently.
Fantastic. Daren, can I bring you in? I'm thinking particularly you were talking earlier about training the whole trust, as an emergency measure. How has your experience been in relation to those staff who maybe are worried about the technology, intimidated, etc.?
I think to be expected early on, it was overwhelming, and we very much went down the line of find something that you think you're going to use a lot and get used to it and get confident with it. Don't worry about trying too many different things. Obviously, we created things like Google Classrooms for staff and created sections on all of the different tools with short 5-minute videos. We created a web portal for them where they could access it. We did daily drop-ins in the first lockdown, and then it kind of moved to like weekly drop-ins. And then the biggest thing I think we need to do moving forward is to and then no disrespect to Helen, but it just made me think of it. I think we need to stop talking about training and start talking about coaching, because training tends to be a one-off, and quite often it's, right, you've been trained on that, go and use it. But technology is constantly changing, and actually your approach to technology is what needs the development, not the technology itself. So if you can coach people to be confident clicking a button, trying something new, giving it a go, letting the students experiment with it, getting some feedback, by getting in the class with them, like Helen said, and saying, look, if you're not confident, you come up with the lesson, I'll deliver the technology side of it, you deliver the pedagogical side of it, you deliver the subject knowledge, or I'll sit at the back of the room and if you've got a problem, I'm there to help, or I'll be next door if you need me, or, well, let's sit down and plan it together. I'll leave you to get on with it, and then we can come back to it afterwards. And I think that kind of confidential coaching approach to nobody's judging, this is purely about developing you. I think we need to do it, because otherwise we're going to lose too many fantastic teachers out of the system because they feel like the system's getting away from them.
Yeah, that's lovely. I think the whole idea of, like, the expression of sitting with Nelly, in other words, like having someone next to you helping you with the use of a particular tool or what have you, I think is really, really important. I also think having the MFL Twitter RT and the Tilt webinars as well, I know that people have really been very appreciative of all the support that's been given. But if you actually have someone sit next to you showing you things, that will be That's really, really valuable. Jane, can I bring you in? Because I know you've done so many like teach meets from your school and everything. It'd be lovely to hear your thoughts on how you've been able to, as a school, support the more reluctant teachers, let's say, or the ones that find technology more intimidating. You're muted, Jane.
Am I muted now?
No, we can hear you loud and clear.
Perfect. Sorry about that. So one of the things actually I wanted to say before that was about the whole idea of confident user of technology, because one of the reasons we do the teach meets as well is to show and to demonstrate to colleagues how we use it always with pedagogy in the back of our mind, so that it's pedagogy led, because you can have a confident user of technology, but actually they're not really sure about how to use it in a pedagogical way. So it's about aligning the two things. So we have the teach meets, but we are aiming for a consistent approach. And one of the things I do in my role is I'll demonstrate a tool to colleagues in we have a staff inset team, a cyber cafe, where we talk about all things technology, and people will ask what tool would work for this, and then I'm really happy. I do one-on-ones and just and coach people, as Daren said, to use a tool and offer to be there to support them if they need it. So yeah, those are the points I want to make, conscious of time. Aligning the pedagogy with the tool, that makes a confident user. I don't want confident users of technology. I want confident users of confident teachers is what I want, who use technology. That's what I'm looking for. And then we support, through a variety of lunchtime sessions, weekly sessions like tech bar, and one-on-ones.
Superb. Thank you ever so much. So I am very aware of time, so I'm just going to hand to Esmeralda, and then I'll pass over to Paul to wrap us up. But thank you ever so much, everyone, for your amazing contributions and reflections. It's been an amazing evening, as I knew it would be. Esmeralda, what are your thoughts on supporting staff who are terrified of the technology and think they're going to break everything as soon as they touch the technology?
Yes, but just to wrap up, I completely agree with Jane. I think the pedagogy has to be there. So it's not something gimmick. One of the things I said, in a little bit different presentation. What is the experience I had as part of my role to do that, basically in my school? What I noticed is at the beginning, we used to offer these training things for people to come in and learn more about technology. And the people who were very scared were avoiding it. And the people who were very good were coming to all these training sessions. And it was like, well, it's lovely to see you here, but maybe you're not the right people who should be. It was lovely, but that people were just basically hiding their heads in the earth. So what we did now is basically, we did this year is to have a questionnaire at the beginning of the year, which is completely confidential. And it's about not just about technology linked to teaching and learning and the pedagogy. Like, for example, how would you use this? Do you feel confident in using OneNote to deliver a lesson and to do practice, to do retrieval practice? Have you used Genially to do retrieval practice again, or the production stages? And then when we got all the information, then we approached the people who obviously needed help, and then one-to-one, then we did the coaching, rather than allowing them to come to us, because some of the people were embarrassed. They didn't want to say that they couldn't do it, and they were in denial, and they were kind of, okay, if I ignore it, it will go away. So it was about pinpoint those people in a really nice supportive way, and then leading them through the way with coaching and the one-to-one sessions, and at the same time to have the other webinars and sessions to learn more, and then those people started coming to the other sessions as well. I don't know if that makes sense. And then also using the HOTS in the department, and to have a little bit of, we had a Padlet of how every department was using technology. So there was people in the normal meetings that were discussing technology, teaching and learning from a digital point of view. And there would be a discussion and a little bit of a little example every half term on how every department was using it, and everybody was celebrating. And then everybody was, some of the people that were doing brilliant things when they're delivering other sessions for other people. And then those people were no experts in digital learning at all, or in technology, but the fact that they were basically projecting the experiences to other people and sharing the experiences made other people feel confident as well. So those are the three elements that we use to really support the people, and it's working.
Well, what an inspirational answer. Thank you so much, Esmeralda. That's brilliant. Okay, so with a few minutes to go, I'd like to hand over to Paul to wrap us up. But again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much, everyone, for your contributions. It's been a really fascinating conversation. It's been great. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Joe, and yeah, thanks for Naomi and myself. To you, Joe, for agreeing to partner in setting up this seminar, and to our speakers, Isabelle, Jane, Daren, Esmeralda, and Helen, for giving such a fascinating perspective on the challenges that have arisen in the kind of pandemic and post-pandemic situation. We'll shortly put up the videos from the presentations on our YouTube channel. I put the address for that into the chat. I should mention that we're thinking of planning. We're planning some kind of publication around the concept of post-pandemic education and modern languages across different sectors. We'll post news about that in the coming weeks on our Twitter feed. Just to say a few things about the Digital Model Languages Seminar. As my colleague on the Language Access and World-Making project, Catherine Boyle, hinted at in her question earlier on, we're very interested in the Digital Model Language Seminar series. We're very interested in approaches which look at how digital affects things across modern languages, right across the sector, from primary to secondary, higher education, and beyond. So we're interested in different approaches. We've already, as we've mentioned, we've already held events in the past on primary and on the approaches at primary level, at the higher education level, of course, as well. And we had an event on critical approaches to digital literacies in modern languages education, which was more on higher education, but perhaps has some interesting lessons too, which is available, and it's related to a publication that's available on our YouTube channel. So we're very interested in keeping on collaborations with schools in the future. So we hope to carry on organizing events across different sectors of education in the future. But I'll just close by saying that we don't have any plans for any seminars for the rest of this academic year, but we'll be posting event news on our next plans for the autumn over the summer. So yeah, once again, thank you to everybody for joining us at the end of the academic year, when everybody, I'm sure, is dying to go off on holiday and got very tired from the school year and academic year and so on. But it's really great to have you all here, and yeah, thank you so much again. Bye bye.